off-grid solutions, to my mind, I mean, I could address universities, hospitals, or schools rather, ministries. I could cut your budget by 30-40%. In today's market, I cut your energy budget by 45% by installing solar. The challenge that the market faces now, which we are trying to solve for, is who can fund the deployment of solar.
Yeah.
It's not a question of, do you want solar? In the early days, when we first started, people were like, but this solar, we don't trust solar.
Yeah.
Today, we have people chasing us to buy panels. Why? Because they can see that even for the wealthy, the cost of energy in Nigeria.
No, it's... Hello and welcome to The Builders. And today we're out of our usual space, but I think in a minute you'll understand why. The person who is our entrepreneur guest for the week is Mr. Nzan Ogbe, and I think I've pronounced that correctly. But what's significant about him is that he is the chairman of Levene Energy Group. And who are they? They are one of just two manufacturers of solar panels here in Nigeria. Really impressive 100 megawatt factory in Lagos, manufacturing solar panels, matching the Chinese and the Europeans for quality and even exporting. And today he's going to just share his journey. He started in oil and gas. He's been in public service. He's one of those people that makes you tired when he tells you all the things he's done. But welcome to Nidacity, Mr. Nzan Ogbe. It's really amazing to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Sure.
We're going to start at the beginning. The first money you ever made.
Okay, that's
First of all, did you inherit any money? I need to.
I wish I did.
Anything?
In a sense, actually, I definitely am happy I didn't inherit any money.
You didn't inherit anything?
I'm happy I didn't.
So you made, whatever you have done is self.
Grace of God.
Thank God.
Yes.
So let's start with the first money you ever made.
Okay, I think to put that in context, it'd be to define who I am.
Yes, please.
I grew up with a mother. My parents were, my dad was a civil servant, very, very pristine gentleman, went to work at 8 in the morning, got back at 5. I can't remember ever seeing my dad in the 30-something years that he was alive, or 40 years that he was alive, being outside of the house at 7 p.m.
Wow.
He was very precise. You could tell his schedule, and he was very, very good at what he did. And then I had a mother who, interestingly, for as far as I remember, was an entrepreneur. She did contracting. She'd owned hotels. She was very industrious, and I think I picked that from her, having been around her, of course, and all of that. And I remember at the age of about 11, growing up in Calabar as a little kid, I loved nuts, this boiled groundnuts.
Okay.
And I remember once saying to my mom, I wanted some, and she was like, this thing would grow on your head. You better find a way to make money from it. And I thought, okay, that's not bad. I did a little bit of a research asking so we had a lot of cousins living in the house, like, okay, how much is it if I were to buy them? And of course, from some pocket money people had given to me. And the bottom of those raw nuts, I had them boil them, and we sold them, made them, sell them in school for a little profit. But that would definitely be my very first taste of profit, as it were. And that started the journey and defined me. And I knew from then onwards that this is what I wanted to do.
You wanted to be an entrepreneur from day one.
From day one. There was no doubt about it. I've never flinched, never looked back, never looked at my degree, never looked at I never collected my NYC certificate. I just went on.
So you just went out there?
I just went out there.
And so where was your first stop? What was your first business?
So when I graduated in 1990, I did my youth service in 91. I was in Lagos. I'd been living in Lagos for quite some time at the time. And myself and a friend of mine had a mutual love for cars. And we used to talk about cars, and we would love to own the cars. We would love to own the cars. We would love to drive. I was a 21-year-old kid. And I think I can't remember if it was a relative of his or a relative of mine, who said they wanted to buy a car. And they're like, okay, we could help you look around. And we helped them find a car and made a small profit from that.
Okay.
And that started my journey into car sales. So my original business was car sales.
Really?
First, apart from selling Groundnuts.
Groundnuts. After Groundnuts,
After Groundnuts,
cars.
I went to cars.
Okay.
Quantum leap. And we sold cars together for many years. I'd say maybe the first 5 years of my career, right out of university.
You'd become a car dealer.
Car dealer. And I could count 5, 6 of the richest people in Nigeria who I sold cars to in that time and who I remain in constant touch with, and I learned a lot from, and we kept the relationship and all of that. So I sold cars, and it was a great place to start. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then after cars?
And after cars, by this time we had gotten to 1996, 95, 96. I took a trip to South Africa with an older friend of mine, Mr. Phillips, Olaya Phillips. And we went to South Africa and went to Johannesburg, went to Cape Town, went to Sun City. And I thought to myself, my goodness, I found paradise. We don't need Europe anymore. We don't need the West. This is Africa. They have everything that we need here. It's just transfer of technology, transfer of ideas. And I got the first franchise you see around today in a lot of buildings, carports, those blue-collared carports. I brought the franchise to Nigeria. I was the first person I brought the franchise to Nigeria. And I started selling carports.
Okay.
From carports, I started importing steel. And went from there. I had a group of friends a few years later who were into trading oil, and then they were just selling oils from trucks. They were still relatively young, maybe 26, 27, 28.
Were you fearless?
Sorry?
Were you fearless?
I don't think that I ever believed that anything was impossible. There was nothing to be afraid of. If you took away, I started with nothing. So if you took it all away, I knew the ingredients of what could get me to where I wanted to be. So that has always been my guiding principle.
Right.
As I tell people, I said, if you don't step out of the boat, you can't walk on water. So I'm not afraid to try.
So you were just moving, because you've mentioned like 4 businesses now. We started with Groundnuts, cars, carports.
Yeah.
Then we've moved to steel.
And I've edited a lot of stuff in that process. There's many other things that we tried doing at the time, but they were all within the gambit of the law. But it was just me trying to find myself. Yeah. What was it that would bring me that? So the initial thing, as every young man, was to make wealth. Okay. And then it became a question of, I want to build. So 5 years into our car dealership business, I said to my partner, if you're going to stay in the car business, I want to get a car dealership. I'm not going to take cars to people and all of that. And it was like, we're making good money. Yeah. I promise you, we're making bank manager money.
Wow.
At that time.
At that age.
But there was no structure. There was nothing.
Right.
Just sell a car, get paid, enjoy yourself.
Yeah.
Maybe invest a bit in the next car. And I said, no, I want to get a car shop. He wasn't keen on a car shop. He was happy with what he was doing. And he still does car business up until today.
Up till now.
And I said, no. So I got a space on Sakatinubu.
Okay.
I got
just around the corner.
Space. Around the corner.
Yeah.
I got a couple of cars from some of my clients who had sold cars to before. Very notable names, as a matter of fact. And I put them in front of the car shop. I had a secretary, I had a little desk. And I think I used my dining table as a conference table. And I had a table. And I would go to work in the morning and come back in the evening. It gave me a sense of some sort of structure, which is something I've always been very big on. I always wanted structure.
Okay.
Even though I didn't...
You didn't need it, but you wanted it.
I wanted it. Okay. At the time, I didn't need it. But ultimately, everyone needs structure.
Yes.
Whilst that gave me some sort of comfort, 1 month passed and I made no sales. Second month passed, I had made no sales and now I had overheads. So I had an old friend, fella Drew to a good friend of mine. I used to bounce ideas off my head. I never liked ideas. And fella was the guy that I went to put those ideas
into some kind
into
of
a sort of format that I could then pitch. And I woke up, I used to live off our road and he lived on Ilabere. I still remember very clearly. When I say I used to live off our road, it wasn't my heart. I had an older friend who gave me space in space. Right. And I walked from off our road to Ilabere at 3:30 a.m. in the morning. I wake up very early. That's my best time to think. And I walked all the way to Ilabere and I knocked on his door and he opened it. Hope no problem. I said, no problem. I said, what's wrong? Why are you here this time? I'm like, well, actually, there's a problem. I said, what's wrong? I said, I've had no sales. It must be spiritual. I was like, what do you mean? He said, since I opened the car shop, nothing's happening. If I go like this another month,
I'm done.
I'm finished. And he said something to me that defined me. He asked me, "What do you do, Nzan?" And I'm like, "Fela, how can you be asking me this kind of stupid question? I mean, you of all people, I bounce everything off." He said, "No, Nzan, what do you do?" I'm like, "Please stop playing. I mean, I walk down here. What do you do?" I said, "I sell cars." He said, "You don't sell cars." I said, "What do you mean I don't sell cars?" He said, "You don't sell cars." He said, "You sell a service." And I'm like, "Hold on, what do you mean?" He said, "Think about it. You're on Sakatinubu and on Adiola Hopewell, or Adiola, is it Adiola Hopewell? The one that links from Falomo Bridge.
Yes. Akinadeshola.
Akinadeshola. So on Akinadeshola, there are about 6-7 serious car shops, CarLink, Globe
They're all there.
Motors,
Yeah, in MI.
all of those guys are on that street. Said, why would anyone that wants to buy a car come to your 2x4 space with 5 second-hand cars in the front yard? I said, okay. He said, what you did, which is the truth, was we knew so much about cars.
Yeah.
People would contact us, and I would tell you, no, you don't need to buy an SUV. You live in this part of town. The roads are good. You don't go out. Why are you wasting money on an SUV? It's too much power. Or no, you live in some place where the roads are bad. I think you need to get an SUV. Why are you buying a V8 engine?
So you were like a car advisory.
As a car advisor of sorts. So don't buy that car for madam. It's nice, but you can't maintain it.
Right.
Or buy this one. That sort of thing. And people always, there was just that constant return of people. And I would hazard, and I hope he forgives me, one of my mentors about Tudeko at the time, I sold cars to him, and he would come back to me, I think 10, 15 years after I'd left the business. Of course, I can't say no to him.
Yeah.
You get my point. But that's the sort of relationships that we built
with your
back
clients,
then.
right?
And once it clicked with me, it became the mantra for my business that you sell a service. What is it that you're giving to people that they cannot find somewhere else?
Right.
Yeah.
And then, so let me take you back, because you've mentioned quite a few businesses. How do you decide the winners and the losers? Because I presume that not all of the things you tried succeeded. So how quickly did you kill a bad idea? Did you ever have to kill a bad idea quickly?
No, not really. I mean, at the earlier stages, you're flighty, your decision-making process was like, oh, it sounds good, so it must be good, so you did it.
Yeah.
But with time, by the time you've lost money a few times, you learn to process things a bit more, you had a system in place. So by the time I started Levene, which is my last business post-government, or my first business post-public service,
yes.
which is 2000,
we're going to talk about that.
2016, a few things I did. First thing I did was constitute a board. After the first set of employees, we hired a head of risk and compliance. So I'd learned from many misses that you needed to have some level of supervision. Doesn't matter if it was your business, doesn't matter whatever. And I didn't just pick people. I didn't have a board for the sake of a board. So I chased Aswi Godalo, who was my first chairman, for 6 months. And he kept saying to me, Nzan, why? I'm in too many boards, Nzan. I'm trying to reduce. I'm like, you're going to do it. It's like, no, Nzan, you're my brother, but you know everyone that I know. You could talk to anybody. And I'm like, I want you because I respect you. And I know that you understand corporate governance, and I know that you understand boardroom, and I want to learn from you. And he was like, anyway, 6 months later, of course, I never let him rest. He accepted and he came on board. And he said to me, you know that I'm going to drive you like you don't own the business. I'm like, that's what I want. And that's what it was. If you saw me in some board meetings, you'd think they just pick me up from the street. They just tear me to bits, challenge my ideas and all of that. And the solar factory, for instance, is one, and I hope he's listening, is one of those things where he said to me, you are crazy, you're too fast spread. And I'm saying, put this on me, and 2 years later, it looks like it was a good,
it looks like you called it well, a good idea, right?
Yeah,
it looks like you called it well. Because and let me tell you how you came onto my radar. I said to Dami Ogbe, who's the UN, I think she's UN
rep,
rep on sustainable energy. I said, I need to understand who's doing interesting things in that space. And immediately she said, you've got to get Nzan. You've got to get Nzan. He's actually manufacturing here in Nigeria. Now, just manufacturing sort of anything in Nigeria, I think deserves a medal, deserves,
I promise,
That solar space in particular, highly technical, new market, greenfield, would not be many people's first choice. And the fact that you've done it and done it to European standards is really quite incredible. What took you there? Because you were in oil and gas. You were in the other end of the spectrum as far as energy is concerned, right?
Very true.
You were in the non-renewables. So what was drawing
dirty
you?
oil.
Yeah, dirty oil. What was drawing you into renewables?
So I tell an interesting story. I've got 2 daughters and a son who's in the spectrum. He's in between the 2 girls. Okay. I used to try to get them interested in what I do because it's very much an absentee father. Because my son was in the spectrum, he lived in Cape Town and I lived in Nigeria and we're going back and forth. So like, this is what I'm doing, guys. And they were quite dismissive of what I did. New generation, They don't believe that you should pollute the environment, And I'm like, well, this is feeding you now, housing you, but And I remember when we designed the profile, the brochure for Levene at the very beginning, I shared it with my eldest daughter then, who was old enough. The younger one was still too young. And 3 minutes, she just flipped through it and said, you have nothing here on renewables. Oh. 3 minutes. And when I first came out of my engagement in public service and went into this job, I had a gentleman who was very high up in Shell prior, a gentleman called York Kenneth, chairman of Shell Cameroon, big boy. So we had that sort of team, sat in a room, strategized, and we missed my then maybe 14-year-old daughter said to me, it's not renewable. So that was always at the back of my head.
Right.
But in 2019, which was, I think, about 5 years into the founding of Levene, we had done a lot of trading. We were known as a trading company. We exported crude oil and imported refined products. We weren't doing badly. I think we probably were top 5, top 6 trading companies, indigenous trading companies. We heard of the Equatorial Guinea oil and gas bid round. Okay, they were selling some acreages in Equatorial Guinea and someone approached me. And we bidded for it. We went in, put in a bid for 4 assets. I have never been to Equatorial Guinea till this day. That's the mystery of it. And we went through that process and I put together a solid team and we put in our bids and we won all 4 assets. And on the back of that, we went around. Of course, it was big announcement. It kind of like launched us into things outside of trading. And everyone wants to be, what are you like? Everybody wants to be an asset owner in Nigeria.
Yes.
Yeah. So we went around looking for funding, went up to Europe, we set up our office in the UK. We were looking for funding everywhere. And everywhere we went in 2019, if you remember, everyone was talking about ESG.
Yeah.
What's your transition plan?
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? I'm just building a business thing. Anyway, we came back home, looked through everything and thought, okay, let's go for gas because we think that gas is the next thing. It's transition fuel. We got a few franchises from NNPC or NGML to distribute gas in Ibeju Lekki, Ijebu-Ode, Badagry, Semeboda, in Cross River, which is where I'm from, and Akwa Ibom. And we then tried to develop those franchises or concessions. And one of them alone would have cost us $70 million plus or minus to just pipe and distribute gas. And we were looking for $300 million to start to develop the oil blocks. So I threw in $75 million to raise. It didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So we came back and said, look, there must be something else that we could do. And so the whole idea of solar came from there.
But solar was the Chinese were everywhere, right?
Oh, yeah.
And they were throwing big government subsidies.
Absolutely.
So why would you, everybody runs away from Chinese competition. Why did you go and face it head on?
So firstly, I love China in the sense of I love everyone in the world. But I think that if we as Africans were to look at the potential that we have and look at the size of our markets and had the support that we had from our governments, honestly speaking, China won't be such a threat. Because if you think about the Western world, part of why they developed is the fact that they could get access to free resources in territories like Africa. But we have those resources. It's just the ability and the conviction to develop those resources. With 200 million people and a power deficit of maybe 24 gigawatts, it's almost a no-brainer, okay? And the question is, were we going to forever keep importing from China. I actually hate the fact that we are an importer nation. And I always felt that we need to add value to stuff. We send out wood and it comes back to us as toothpick and matches. How ridiculous can that be? We send out cocoa and it comes back to us as Bonvita, chocolate, Milo. Literally everything, is imported. And I thought we could make a change there. But what actually gave me the conviction to put our own money into that venture was the fact that when we decided that we were going solar, we started scouting around, okay, let's start to do the factory and all that. And I ran into this guy who had been in the space for a bit, but he was doing deployment of mini grids and he had just secured a contract to solarize the Sterling Bank building on Marina. But he needed partnership for funding and all of that. And we had a bit of money. And we started having a conversation, agreed to do a joint venture, and we deployed that project, which is first of its kind, I think in sub-Saharan Africa, 17-story building. Completely wrapped around with solar panels, technology called BIPV, Building Integrated Photovoltaic Technology. And the experience from that project was that we had 8 months delayed due to supply chain. And of course, that affects your cost. And I ran the numbers just on the top of my head, okay? And I said to myself, what China has in terms of price advantage, if you balance it out with efficiency of supply, you could either knock it off completely or reduce it significantly enough for you to have the peace of mind to localize solar panels in Nigeria. And that's where it started from.
No, I think it's an amazing initiative. So recently I went to interview a young man who's exporting cocoa, and he wanted to meet former President Obasanjo. So we got talking, and I said, former president said, we were talking about the cement industry, and he said that when he started, we were net importers of cement, and that he called Aliko Dangote and said, what would it take for you to manufacture locally? And the answer was very simple. The economics of it was make it as profitable for me to manufacture locally as it is to import.
Absolutely.
I'll do it.
Absolutely.
Tie my importation to my manufacture. I feel that, this is just me, I'm not in government anymore, but that sort of solution is what will develop this huge industry that you've stepped into, because, you do need some protection when you're competing as well with a competition that has government support of their government. And I think it's a thing that a lot of Nigerians don't understand, that some of the goods that are imported here are actually subsidized. That word subsidy that we've been taught to hate is not...
it's not such a bad thing.
It's not such a bad word.
Yeah.
So what protection do you need? Or what protection, if you were speaking to policy now, because you also did government,
yes,
right?
I did. I did. I think that's a brilliant question. And if we had a struggle, it is that level of government support from a policy standpoint. So I tell you something, one of the strangest things that you could ever imagine, if I import a panel fully manufactured from China and I brought it in, I don't pay any duty.
Yeah, no duty. Yeah.
But if I bring in components, I've bought land, built a factory, imported equipment, employing 120 Nigerians, paying taxes, paying electricity bill. I ran around speaking to different government officials trying to say, look, you have a problem. It's actually, my problem is much less than yours. We've just invested, quite a bit of money.
It's quite a bit of money.
I take that back.
Yeah.
We've invested quite a bit of money, but we're a business we would get by, and we have other subsidiaries, and we're getting, in any case, we funded the project from our
retained earnings.
Exactly.
Right.
So, but the bigger problem is that the nation has a problem, and it's an energy problem. And one way you can get power to literally everyone, no matter how remote their location is solar.
Yes.
It's a no-brainer. I can install a mini grid in literally anywhere in Nigeria, literally. But you're more challenged, and we invested in gas anyway. So gas is the other fuel that would help you industrialize. We invested significantly there with our acquisition.
Yes, you're chairman of
Axxela. So we invested in Axxela. So that's a great product. But think about what it costs you to pipe gas to different locations. Significant, and it's time consuming. I could deploy solar overnight. Okay, a combination of both of them is heaven. Now, and I went around trying to convince public servants to look, see the problem, and I'm not sure if they saw it. With due respect, but I decided to write directly to the president, and I think because it wasn't long after, the whole concept of solarization of public infrastructure came from that. And then the local content, the whole
local content
Nigeria First policy
was
a fallout, I believe, of that memo. But there's still a lot of work.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of work. There's still a lot of work to be done. It needs to be implemented. It needs to be, and I keep saying to people, now is the time. China used to give 15% subsidy to exporters from China. And so if you take that 15% and add to 15% that I pay for my solar wafers, I was 30% net. That's why no one could compete. Europe couldn't compete. America couldn't compete. So there's no way that Nigeria could compete. But then again, when you think about access to funding, if I'm selling my panels, I'm selling them in Naira. And you can come to my factory, you can see the products that you're buying. If you have a problem, you can return the panels.
And we know where you are.
We know where I am.
Yeah.
We have after-sales service. We have a full service center. We do trainings. We bring students from universities and secondary schools, and we walk them through the whole process. So we are building a generation of people who understand energy.
Yes.
We're doing that.
Yeah.
And to not have that 100% support from government, which is what people like my big brother, Aliko Dangote, had under Obasanjo, is a misnomer. Today, we are exporting cement to God knows how many countries. We are now exporting, look at it, in the middle of all of this war, we are exporting fuel to Europe.
Yeah.
We're exporting spread.
And you're exporting now to Ghana, right?
I'm exporting to Ghana now.
Wow.
We exported the first panels shipped to Ghana in November of last year. We set up an office and a showroom in Ghana now. We're looking at Cameroon next. We're looking at Côte d'Ivoire, Benin Republic. So we're looking at, and I find that everywhere I go to chase oil, I find people very high up in government telling me, oh, we saw your profile. You do solar. I'd like you to have a conversation with our Minister for Energy. I'd like you to have a conversation with the head of energy. It's incredible. So it's an African problem.
Yes.
Actually, it's a global problem.
Yes,
because
but Africa has a solution this
Africa
time.
has a solution at no cost. I mean, you think about it, you're deploying solar in Europe. How many months
how much sun do they
How much sun do you have?
2 days a year.
Here, you have sunlight.
Yes,
especially if you go up north, the irradiance there, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so I feel like we're wasting so much capacity by not tapping into the source of energy.
So off-grid solutions, which is really what you are. Do you see that as the future?
Absolutely.
Of that electrification process?
Especially for a continent like Africa and a country like Nigeria, where a lot of the... Look, I say to people, so that 2003 when we went to South Africa on that trade mission, up to 2007 when the whole NIPP process started, I think we missed a window there where had they completed that process, maybe we would have 10,000 megawatts today.
No.
Maybe we would. But once that was missed, then it became a big challenge. I don't know where we would find, $50-60 billion today to give the populace grid power.
Yeah.
Because you get to invest in generation, distribution. You have the people that invested in GenCos. You're owing them trillions and trillions of naira. You haven't settled that.
Yeah.
So off-grid solutions, to my mind, I mean, I could address universities, hospitals, or schools rather, hospitals, ministries. I could cut your budget by 30-40%. In today's market, I cut your budget by 30-40%, your energy budget by 45% by installing solar.
Wow.
So the challenge that the market faces now, which we are trying to solve for, is who can fund the deployment of solar.
Yeah.
It's not a question of, do you want solar? In the early days, when we first started, people were like, but this solar, we don't trust solar.
Yeah.
Today, we have people chasing us to buy panels. Why? Because they can see that even for the wealthy, the cost of energy in Nigeria.
No, it's
and it's not like it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous in the sense that based on the capacity of earnings of the populace, it's ridiculous. But if you compare it to international market prices, it doesn't even measure. Do you get my point?
Yeah.
So, but you have to solve for it. And I think that one way to do it is through this means. Now, the federal government, through the DES program, the REA DES program, have borrowed $750 million. Okay? This $750 million has had significant impact. I've worked with REA. They're doing an amazing job. ABBA, Femi. They're doing amazing, and their team are doing an amazing job deploying solar. We're doing a few of the mini grids there. We're looking at different iterations of things in the space. But guess what? Up until very recently, I would even say up until now, 90% of that $750 million is going back to China and somewhere in the West. And there is no clear-cut strategy to take back some of that money and domesticate it. Those debts are going to be paid by our children. And yet we are giving the money to China. Not because they're better than us.
No.
We've had people come to our factory and said, we don't believe this is in Nigeria. So it can be done. Yeah, we might be a bit more expensive, but hey, how do you... Because the only way we can get better is scale.
Yes.
How do I scale? If I have access to more markets, if I have access to cheaper funding.
Or if I was getting 15% government subsidy to wind assist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That would then allow me to sell panels to the average man on the street at much cheaper. We're not looking at making a killing from this. It's not our mainstay, or it wasn't. Today, I see it as my future because we are in the age of data.
Yeah.
Every single person is consuming data at a rate. You have data centers, everyone's consuming data. So, and data ultimately is energy. Okay, so it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
It's a great business to be in, but we can allow foreigners to come in and take it over, and we keep spending this money and sending it across. I don't know, we're probably spending $200 million, $300 million, per annum importing panels, probably even more into this market. I'm not keeping track because I'm just focused on just supplying the domestic market. But our products are appreciated in Ghana. People are paying for it in Ghana. People are asking for it in Cameroon. This same Nigerian product.
That's impressive.
For me, it's almost like a life mission.
Yeah,
what we're trying to do.
No, there's something a bit evangelical about how when an oil and
Exactly.
gas man goes into renewables,
I said to people, I'm paying for my sins. I'm paying for my oil sins.
Having polluted the air, you decided to
I'm
make
making
good.
penance.
No, but I mean, it's incredible, and it's very impressive to hear that.
Thank you.
Someone firstly, like I said, manufacturing in Nigeria is not for children,
it's not for the
and then
free
manufacturing solar and doing so renewably it's really,
and government must encourage the real sector. I said to someone the other day, I said, do you know, growing up in Lagos here, all the wealthy people we knew, or in Nigeria generally, were industrialists, or most of the wealthy people were industrialists.
Yes.
Mike Merchandise from the East, Elsie Okoli, Okoya, Razak Okoya, and the Okoya brothers, the Adeboalis. These were all industrialists. But guess what killed all of their businesses? It's energy.
Yeah.
It's energy. Because when our costs at the factory, before we now started putting, we have 17,000 square meters of roof space, entire roof space, we're solarizing it. We'll generate 3 megawatts of power from that.
So you generate your own power?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So we even have excess capacity, and we're doing a deal with Ikeja Disco where we push it into the grid. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
How did you... So, what I see here is you're this what do they call it? Hydra-headed entrepreneur.
Beast.
Yeah, I didn't say beast. Hydra-headed entrepreneur that sees opportunities everywhere. Now, we in Nidacity are on a mission of our own. We're talking about our startup rate. Our failure rate is very high. We're starting business, but we're failing. As somebody who's done many businesses, what's your playbook? How would you advise a young entrepreneur, the guy who started selling peanuts at 11, right, and didn't inherit any money? Advise him, her today. What are your guiding principles? What's the difference between win and lose for you, for the next generation of entrepreneurs?
So I think that if there's something that the next generation lacks, because they have a lot of advantages. They have technology. They have tech is the biggest leapfrogger, for the lack of a better word, of anything. And they have that. They have tech, so they can sit in their bedrooms and run multi-million-dollar businesses without needing to wear a jacket or even native that I'm wearing. So they wear their slacks and their trainers, and I envy them for being able to do that. But I find, look, if you don't know about your past, your future, you don't really get a sense of. So because I said to people, I went to university to visit my elder brother. My elder brother studied at the University of Calabar.
Okay.
And we're always very particular about food in my home. My mom just made sure that we had the best possible food. So to this day, I'm very I pick my food.
You're a foodie?
I hardly eat out. Hardly
Really?
ever. Yeah. But I remember going to visit my elder brother. I probably was 12 years old at the time. Or no. So he's 10 years older than I am. 8 years older than I am. So I probably was, about 12 years old at the time. And I went to visit him. And Nzan, you're around. Okay. He gives me a meal ticket and takes me to the cafeteria. And they serve us food in the tray in a decent environment. We sat down, we ate, and it was good food. I didn't fall sick, and I left. And the hostels were clean. And because they didn't see that, then you don't understand that there's a potential for Nigeria to be great, which is why you hear a lot of people saying, this is a useless country.
Yeah, just get out.
Because you've never seen anything good in the country.
Right.
But I saw Nigeria at the time where it had potential. My mom used to tell me that back in the days, they would go to the market and they'll go to stalls. And if the lady, whoever that was selling wasn't there, there's a bowl there. They knew the price of the goods. They'll put them and take whatever they want and go. In this same country. It's hard to believe. There was a time where, and I love the Yoruba culture, okay? And I married Yoruba. So the first question that you were asked in a Yoruba home is, Tani Babai, which is who's your father? And that was a system of checking, who are you? Where did you come from? Yeah. Let's check the heritage, blah, 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 blah. And that applied to every culture, by the way. And it allowed you to pretty much sift the chaff from the wheat and forced you to have some level of integrity or to have integrity. I don't see that.
Okay.
People feel that they can do stuff. And I mean, I set up a small venture capital firm from giving young people money. Okay, go and do this business. You want to, someone said to me, why don't you formalize it? So we set up a small venture capital firm and we lend money, a few hundreds of thousands of dollars to young people. And my experience was very bad. Why? Because they're extremely opinionated and they believe that they know it all. So you've heard me reference some names in the course of my conversation. Yeah. These are people that I look up to. Okay? Even if I became 10 times richer than them today, I would still look up to them because we basically stood on their shoulders. Yeah. I learned certain things from them. I learned about car. Once that I did a transaction that went bad and I went to see this same gentleman I mentioned about. And he was telling me, look, Nzan, you have to ensure that your name. Don't do anything that would put a question mark on your name. So for me, that would be it. But also, there's a time for planning. Everyone is a rush these days. We are in instant coffee, everything is instant. And then you have the Instagrams and TikToks that's showcasing people as if they were not human beings. Yeah. There's no fault, there's everything. They just happened. Everyone's driving these big fancy cars and they have so much money. So it doesn't allow you to understand that life is a process. You start from here and you grow to there. Yeah. I was saying to a young man who came to visit me a few days ago, I said, he was telling me he was afraid to start. He was doing a business. He started juicing and he gave me a few bottles of his juice and I thought, this is amazing. And he was telling me, I said, so what are you doing? He says, he's doing X amount of this quantity. I'm like, well, how are you doing this quantity? So what's your plan? He said, no, he's just moved to a bigger house and he's going to be producing it at the back of it. I said, no, that's not what I don't want to hear that from you. This is a business. Yeah. And it's like, but what if I fail? I said, how long have you been doing the business? He said, 2 years. I said, how has it been? He said, it's been very good. I said, so you have to step out of the boat to walk on water. I said, look, the problem that people have is fear of failure. Yeah. What makes you is failure, actually.
No, I think you're right.
What makes it failure? Right. Yeah. If you haven't failed at something, if you came to me and said you wanted me to invest in you, and I asked if you had failed, and you said, no, all of your life you've been out. I'm saying, just when you go and meet the person, it's not my money you used to feed.
we learn more from our failures than from our successes. Absolutely. That's the honest truth.
Absolutely.
And and that's something we talk about a lot here in Nidacity. In fact, the team members, they know if they don't run a business, I don't employ them. If you can't hustle, if you're not an entrepreneur yourself, you have no business here. Because we're trying to teach and inform entrepreneurs. So if you've never had that experience, if you've never fallen, and every entrepreneur has their failure story.
Absolutely.
They may not say it.
No, they have more failures than successes. You have it's a 95.5% success rate.
But do you think that, though, that because Nigeria stigmatizes failure, and it's something that people are afraid to fail, and therefore they're afraid to try. Because, the reaction, when you fail, people don't say, well, at least you try. It's like, he failed. Oh, this one crashes. We're very dramatic. And interestingly, America doesn't do that, right? And I think that's why they're still very entrepreneurial. People go bankrupt and still can become president. In other countries, and culturally, failure, we all shout, you failed. We're very success driven. Do we need to change the narrative around failure for entrepreneurs for more people to try?
I think most definitely. And I while I agree with you, I think though that we are even more accommodating of failure. The bigger problem is the access to education on how to access the funding that people require.
Okay.
So a lot of people feel that because I have a great idea, that in itself, I was saying to you about investing in venture capital. You have people come and sit down and they're telling you, we want to do this, we want to do that. And okay, we could back you. And then the moment you put in your money and they start to see a little bit of success, it turns.
Yeah.
They now start declaring the terms. No, I had the IP, I had this, I had that, I had that.
Now that's the greed.
Not realizing
that without that money,
and the money is really nothing. What you're getting on board is just like I went to go and meet Aswe and say, look, I'm submitting my business under your chairmanship so that you can be a bouncing board, you can be a supervisor of sorts over what I do. That mentorship is so critical that it is absolutely incredible. And I have many mentors. I've watched them and not everything about their lives is great. As you watch mentors closer, you see where they're making errors.
Yeah.
I've seen really, really successful men who did things. I remember seeing a gentleman once who was very successful many, 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 many years ago. And I said to him that we went to see someone in public service together who I knew. And when we finished the meeting, it was very late in the day. And I said to him, sir, I said, yes. I said, you are a very successful man from what I know. And he said, yes, God has been kind to me. I said, yeah. I said, why would you be staying up to this time, running around government offices, looking for? And he said to me, you wouldn't understand. But I knew as far back as 20 years ago that I wasn't going to be doing the same thing I was doing in perpetuity. There had to be a cut-off time, which is why when I started Levene, I said in 10 years' time, I'm going to step down, which I did.
You talked
I did in
that.
December. So they gave me a fancy title now, Executive Vice Chairman, which basically says I can come and sit down with
former ministers and chat about business.
And chat about business. And that allows me to get into another level of business or of mentorship or something else. But more importantly, also allows space for others to come up.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you're just sitting up on top there and now not allowing people to come. And that's not success. For me, is to have 5, 10... A few days ago, one of my staff came to my office and said to me, sir, can I talk to you? He said, yeah, his background is IT. And he said to me, he's developing this app where something to do with Airbnb, and he has a system in place and he was showing me all the thing. And he said he was worried about talking to me about it because he wasn't sure how I'd look at it. I'm like, look, you just made my day.
Yeah.
You made my day. The fact that you're doing your job and yet you're finding time to do something creative to add value, you make my day. I've had staff who have left my organization 5, 6 years ago. I'm still in touch with them. Yeah. I still encourage them. They still come to me when they need advice. I go to them if we need to do something that has their skill set. Yes. So no one's forced to be there, but you have to grow and people have to support you to grow.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I mean, it's an ecosystem that we need to develop and we need to harness. But the point you made about people taking investment and then reneging or not doing the right thing, it worries me because I've spent quite a bit of time researching this, trying to understand where are the bottlenecks. And that's one of them, right? So investors are very wary at times because of the experience that they've had. And maybe one of our missions here is to try and educate people better around, look, if you own 60% of something decent, you're good. Why do you want to own? I mean, you don't need to have 100%.
But that's a Nigerian thing, though. Everybody wants to be chairman, CEO, so proprietary, everything.
Yeah, but
And
it's
it doesn't
holding
work.
us back.
And that's why you find people building look, when we acquired Axxela, when we started the process, we started on our own.
Axxela, by the way, is
Axxela is the largest indigenous gas
distribution company
in the country.
Yeah.
And when we started the process of bidding for Axxela, and it was a significant size asset, I always knew that I wasn't going to do it on my own. Experience has taught me shared risk, shared reward, because there's also the potential that things could go wrong. And you need to share that as well. And I reached out to a friend of mine, reached out to me and like, oh, I hear you're doing this, and could we work together? I'm like 110%. Okay, you have to be careful though who you work with.
Of course,
those are things you have to check and all of that. But I think that being able to huddle and share ideas, and we as older people mentor people. I remember when in the mid 2000s, early 2000s, myself, Lanre Kupoli, Feladro Toyin Suba, we used to go to universities and speak to students and mentor them. Of course, we are now older and everybody's scheduled. 3 children on my pad, traveling back and forth. Not that much time, but I always make myself available to young people. And we call ourselves ancestors. Anyone over 15 in the organization call an ancestor. And I think average age would be about maybe 27 or so. They're the brightest, they're the best, they're the most, they're incredible. Once they don't have don't come from it, that Gen Z spirit of knowing everything. Which is a challenge. I find that, you know everything and yet you know nothing because you actually didn't open books and read them or do researches. Everything comes to you by ChatGPT. So there's work. I think there's work to do. But what I find particularly exciting is the sort of the energy, the willingness to take risk. I think it portends very well for this country. That if we can harness them, we've got a pretty bright future. And extremely. I mean, I've seen, like I said, there's so many young people in the organization. We're 130. We're growing every day or more. I don't even know. And maybe 60% of that, actually, I tell a lie, maybe 70% of that are people 35 and below. So, and these are all bright, hungry people who are looking for mentorship. They're asking questions. So what I did when I was GMD was, whenever I was going for a meeting, it doesn't matter who he was, I had a system in place where
you take one of them.
I'll take one of them.
Yeah, I do that.
And I want you to experience what it feels like to sit in front of greatness. And I'll take permission from whoever it was. I'm like, just sit around, you have a conversation. And I went to a meeting just before I came here today with a staff of mine who was one of my first mentors or mentees, and I saw her operating, and I was like, my goodness, this is like me when I was 20 something or in my early 30s. She was so seamless. She could walk the room. She understood what.
No, it's good to see.
But if you don't submit yourself to someone, you would never learn a skill like that,
and you'll never get into those rooms.
You would never get into those rooms. You never get into those.
No,
rooms.
I did. I do something similar to. I've been taking mine, take them out.
Fantastic.
Show them, and that's how you learn. I mean, that's how we learned, right? We were taken to meetings. We were the ride along in the meetings. Then we understood that when you walk into a room, this is how you talk.
Absolutely.
This is how you speak, and this is how you process certain information. It's great. Mr. Nzan. I've never, I looked at the combination of letters and it's like, Nzan Ogbe. Thank you so much for this masterclass for Nidacity. I'm sure there are a lot of entrepreneurs that are going to be very encouraged by your story and by all the things you've achieved. And really, we're watching this space because we think it's not over yet. We think this, you're just on sabbatical.
It's a new phase. It's a new phase.
On sabbatical. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.